The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a fun show for you here today. Obviously, one of the best weeks in college football on the calendar. We've got a ton of bowl games that we're going to break down. We're going to talk about the college football playoff with Tony Pauline later in the show in Draft Buzz. But let's kick things off. Saturday scouting at the very top with Ben Fennell. We're going to talk about all the big New Year's Day bowl games and all the things you can watch with some of the top matchups in college football. Rose Bowl, Outback Bowl, Citrus Bowl. Going to be a lot of fun breaking some of that down with Ben. After that, we're going to talk with one of Ben's broadcast partners in Tom Luginbill, the ESPN longtime college football analyst. We're going to talk about some of the top players around the country and how he feels about their projection to the NFL. After that, we'll catch up with Tony in Draft Buzz, talk about the college football playoff. I'll talk about a player that has got a huge job this week in Scouting Report trying to block Chase Young. That's Tremaine Ankrum, the offensive tackle from Clemson, a senior who is going to the Senior Bowl. I'll break him down in that segment. We'll answer a question from you at home in Draft Mailbag. Again, the best way to support the show. It's holiday season. If you're in the giving mood, do us a favor and just go over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. We will always answer it here on the show if you've got a question. So if you've got a question you want to get on the show, we will answer it if you go and leave it in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you listen. All right, let's get to the top here. Let's start things off. It's time for Saturday Scouting and Ben Fennell.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, it's bowl season, and with it being bowl season now, we're going to bring in Ben Fennell for Saturday Scouting to talk about not just the game that he's doing, but some of the other big games here coming up for this holiday weekend. Ben, I said it earlier, but Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody, Happy Holidays to you.
To you as well.
Yeah, it's it's an exciting time because obviously we got some of the biggest games in the postseason for college football coming up over the next next few days. We're going to change our schedule a little bit next week. We're going to wait until after those New Year's Day games are over before we put out like a reaction and kind of react to those games before previewing. So all the previewing is going to happen right here. We're going to do the playoff games later with Tony. I want to focus here with you with the New Year's Day games because you've got one of them in the Citrus Bowl. So let's do what we normally do. Let's talk about Alabama, Michigan, preview the game that you're going to be doing and some of the matchups you're excited to watch.
Yeah, tons of matchups in this game. This is just a great time of year for sports, too. You got meaningful bowl games, meaningful NFL. You got the transition into draft season for the teams with not playoff contention. You got hockey, you got basketball.
Hot stove season for
no question.
Baseball. Yeah, it's a fun time of year. But let's go to Alabama, Michigan here. And obviously, look, it's the Alabama skill players. And you know, one thing that stood out to me actually getting ready for this podcast, it seems like, and we don't know because we're shooting this now, it's Tuesday morning. It's Christmas Eve morning. We're still a few days away and some time away from some of these games, so some decisions may come. At this point, though, it seems like less players are not playing in bowl games than last year. It seemed like last year every game had like one or two of their stars not playing. This year, I mean, for your game, like the only ones that I've seen that it sounds like definitely are not playing are Trevon Diggs, the corner, and Terrell Lewis, the outside linebacker. Both those guys have had injuries in the past. Don't want to risk it. Hey, I want to go into the postseason healthy. That kind of makes sense to me. But I haven't seen anybody else, Michigan or Alabama. Michigan had a boatload of guys that didn't play in last year's bowl game. They got stomped by Florida. I think that's an interesting theme, kind of looking.
A lot of that's kind of coincidental, too, and timing.
A little bit.
Based on the teams and if they're in a competitive bowl game. And also, like Alabama and Michigan are a little bit more the close to the vest type of teams.
They are, yes.
So it's almost like if you don't ask, they might not tell you.
Right, yep.
And, Harbaugh with this whole depth chart kind of concealing. And so they might not, announce all the players playing right up until game time.
Yeah.
You might not know even as a TV production crew, which is really tough when you don't really know what to prepare for and who's starting, who may not be there.
Got to prepare for all 100 guys on the roster.
No question. You got to have graphics ready, information, background, so it kind of sends us for a loop and really not knowing. But it's also an exciting time, especially the redshirt rule.
I love it.
Lots of new players. And you get opportunities in the bowl games. Maybe a freshman that hasn't played gets an opportunity, and now you don't have to worry about burning that red shirt just in a bowl game. This is a great rule to maybe get a taste of a new player and get excited for next year, and then you see them in the spring game. And this is really the debut for some of the young players on teams where, let's face it, 2019's over.
Yep.
Let's go make some money in the bowl game for your program. Let's have fun. finish the seniors, out the right way. And let's get excited about the youth and the depth behind them.
Yep.
In Alabama, Michigan, we might be talking more about the freshmen than the draft prospects, once we get closer to the bowl game.
Yeah, to that point, I think a lot of people in the past would say, like, oh, these bowl games, they don't mean anything. But when you talk to the coaches and the people inside that program, it's not just about getting the young players in now, because now we're able to see them in the game. Before, we weren't able to see those guys. It was more about, we get an extra 2.5 weeks of practice. And I can tell you from being at one of those programs, when you've got that extra 2.5 weeks, you're preparing for the game. You're going to game plan. It is more all about, it's like an extra 2 weeks of spring ball. You're getting those young guys in, and you're having them go up against starters that are preparing for the NFL draft or juniors that are going to be your studs next year. You're putting the true freshman next to them, and you're putting him going up against them in one-on-ones and seeing, all right, this is what we've got now going into next year.
In a weird way, it's almost a new season.
Yeah.
And the fan base kind of puts 2019 aside. It's already happened. The ebbs and flows, the ups and downs. Did you win your conference or not? And now it's like, all right, this is kind of the little preview into next year. And what does your program have to offer? Moving down the road, and you maybe get a look at that freshman to be excited about for next year. And it's kind of an exciting, unpredictable time.
All right, well, let's talk through this Alabama offense going up against this Michigan defense. Obviously, Don Brown, we know about that defensive scheme. You look at, obviously the Alabama playmakers, Judy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. We're going to get a piece of all of them, hopefully, as long as all of those guys are playing. Going up against the Michigan secondary, and I think you look at Lavert Hill, a senior corner you and I both like, as kind of the prototype press corner. And then also they've got a younger guy in Ambry Thomas, who was a third-team All-Big Ten player this year as well, playing on the other side. Josh Metellus, a safety. He's going to be put to the test because I don't think his athleticism is necessarily a strength of his game. So coming downhill and being able to break down and finish one-on-one as a tackler will be really, really important for him as well.
Yeah, a couple intriguing matchups there. I definitely want to see Lavert Hill press corner against these Alabama receivers. We'll see who plays.
Yep.
And then there's some interesting matchups. Like Khaliki Hudson, I would love to see matched up against a dynamic tight end.
Okay.
Alabama really doesn't have that this year.
Right, sure.
Michigan has a variety of pass rushers. No true one-on-one pass rushing demon.
Right.
So you're not really going to get to see that one-on-one test against Jedrick Wills or an Alex Leatherwood. But Don Brown has one of the more creative and exotic pressure schemes. So the second Mac Jones gets into a third and medium and third and long, you're going to get a lot of creative and exotic pressure schemes. So it's an interesting look at the Alabama tackles in a different sense than just a one-on-one edge rusher.
Yep.
We're going to look at their mental processing, their ability to ID things, the ability to pass off, stunters, blitzers, things like that, coming from the second and third level, especially with 2 to 3 weeks to prepare.
Yeah.
Don Brown, one of the better defensive coordinators in preparing and attacking opponents' protections.
Yep.
So you might see some things they haven't put on tape yet. With the younger, less experienced quarterback in Mac Jones, may see some things he's never seen before.
That's a good point.
So I'm more interested in looking at these Alabama tackles and how they process some of these, lack of a better word, NFL-style pressure schemes from Don Brown.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point from an Alabama standpoint. I guess from Michigan standpoint, we're going to see Josh Uche, the linebacker, edge player. We're going to see him at the Senior Bowl. He is a guy that I would say, all right, when we go back and watch tape, how did he look against Leatherwood? How did he look against Wills? That's going to be important from a pure one-on-one standpoint from his angle.
Right.
I agree, though. It's going to be all about play ID, mental processing for Judge Wills.
They have some intriguing players like Kwity Paye, Josh Uche's like the Jannard Avery type of player, undersized edge rusher.
Carlo Kemp is another guy I think that's making plays for them up front.
They have the transfer Mike Dana from Central Michigan as well. Who hasn't had the kind of season they expected from him, considering the production at Central Michigan. But another one of those pieces that they like to move around on third down.
Yeah.
He'll play at 3-tech, he'll play at the edge, a lot of stunts, a lot of loops, some fun games too, where the DN on the other side will almost loop all the way around, and you see kind of these moving parts and guys flashing all over the place. So it's a fun scheme if they get into third and long.
Yeah, no question. And I want to go over to the other side as well. I actually studied Shea Patterson for the very first time over the weekend. And this is a guy, to me, look, he's undersized for the quarterback spot, but he's pretty athletic. He's got really light feet. He looks the part when he's dropping back. He's got natural arm talent. I think he's fairly accurate with the football. I think his velocity and the ball placement, everything there is pretty good. He just plays a little bit too frenetic. I think he kind of goes back and forth between playing too slow and then playing too fast. And you could tell tell he's just kind of panicking back there. I want to see him kind of look good in this game against the defense that it's tough to look good against more often than not. We'll see what he's able to do, but we're going to see him down at the Senior Bowl here in a few weeks now.
And I want to see what Alabama does with these kind of hybrid secondary players.
Yeah.
The Shaheem Carters, the Jared Mabins,
Sure.
the Xavier McKinneys, guys that could play nickel, play strong safety, play free safety, play dime linebacker with a mobile quarterback. So you may see some spying, you may see some kind of cover one rat stuff and getting a guy down into the hole and then spying the quarterback and mirroring him outside the pocket. So a lot of interesting players for Alabama, despite not having their stud middle linebacker, Dylan Moses, most of the year.
No question. I think when you look at McKinney, too, his impact as a blitzer, again, going back to Patterson, good mental game for him and how he's able to recognize.
And he's much more of a Ronnie Harrison than a Deontay Thompson, in my opinion.
Right.
More of a down in the box, kind of moving forward guy. Deontay Thompson was more of a back end, rangy, free safety type of player.
No, he's a guy I'm excited to do more work on. Last matchup I feel like I would want to hit on in this game would be the trenches. You look at Michigan's offensive line, very senior-laden group. You got John Runyon at left tackle, John Runyon Jr., obviously the son of Eagles' great right tackle, John Runyon. He's going to the Shrine game. Ben Bredesen, the one of the guards, is going to the Senior Bowl. Michael Onwenu, also a guard that's going to the Shrine game. So I think when you look at that group, Cesar Ruiz is the center, and he's rumored to maybe be entering the draft. So this is an upperclassman group going up against an Alabama front that has a lot of youth there, but we know about Raekwon Davis. Anthony Jennings is going to play in this game as well. He's a little bit banged up, but the senior edge rusher playing in his final game. Certainly a test for that group up front for Michigan.
Yeah, and Anthony Jennings should see a lot of Sean McKeon, the big tight end for Michigan, who I think is Shrine or Senior Bowl as well.
He's Senior Bowl.
Senior Bowl. So that should be a good matchup. McKeon's really not featured in the offense, but a guy that can survive at the point of attack, decent in the trenches. I think will be a better NFL player. He reminds me a lot of Nick Vannett coming out of Ohio State, competitive player, big games. Just the position really wasn't featured at Ohio State, and carved out a nice role for the Seahawks for a couple of years. But McKeon, interesting player, big player too.
Sure, no question. All right, well, let's get to, actually, really quickly, Michigan. I saw this one big piece of news. We talked a lot about that duo of wide receivers coming into the end of the year, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black. Ronnie Bell, who's a sophomore, has kind of emerged as that go-to weapon for them. Tariq Black, I saw, looks like he might be entering the portal. I don't know if he's going to be playing in this game.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so he,
Black, Peoples-Jones, the Alabama kids, all from that highly touted 2017 recruiting class.
Right.
All sorts of who's who up and down that list. So check that out if you're ever bored.
Sure. Yeah, right. Exactly right.
They have Nico Collins, too. So a couple interesting players there. Black and Peoples-Jones were supposed to be the guys.
Yes.
And the quarterback issues
up too.
And the injury issues. To say the least, their careers at Michigan have not gone as planned.
No question.
Like most things under the Harbaugh era.
Over the last few years, no doubt. All right, well, let's get to some of the other New Year's Day bowls because there are a bunch of games in this on this day that are obviously always good. You want to be able to play on New Year's Day, and a lot of the guys are going to be playing in this game. Let's start with the Outback Bowl, Minnesota versus Auburn. Kind of an interesting Big Ten SEC matchup here. A couple teams that had some big wins this year. I kind of like Auburn in this game, but we'll see. What are your thoughts? I think going into this matchup.
Yeah, interesting game. Just kind of a unique matchup. I think Fleck wants to get an SEC win under his belt and moving into 2020 here. He had a pretty good year at Minnesota, going right down to the wire there with Ohio State in the Big Ten. Auburn, interesting matchup. They had to play UCF last year, I think, in a bowl game.
Right.
Minnesota this year. It's kind of like the Big Brother style bowl games where they're playing the lesser team, which is always an interesting dynamic. But Minnesota's got a lot of talent. They have Rodney Smith, who's like a 6-year, 7th-year senior. Tyler Johnson, the young sophomore. Rashad Bateman, that redshirt sophomore. Blaze Andrus, who is a third-team player of the Big Ten.
Correct, yep.
A couple players on defense, Antoine Winfield Jr., so a bunch of interesting players there.
Yeah, Winfield has been making plays left and right. I think he was a finalist for the Thorpe Award. A free safety with great range, ball skills. We'll see if he decides to come out. He's faced some injury issues going back earlier in his career, so we'll see if he decides to enter. But I'll tell you what, watching that front seven, Carter Coughlin, the edge rusher.
Thomas Barber, I think.
Thomas Barber's a senior, and then Kamal Martin, who's not going to play in the game. He's been banged up for most of the year. I think when you look at that front seven, I'm watching him, and I'm like, all right, Kamal Martin, solid player. Coughlin, very good on stunts. He'll find a role
athletic
in the
player.
NFL.
His numbers are down this year. It's interesting.
Yeah, he's probably like he's the driving force of that front. But Winfield, this guy's making plays from sideline to sideline. I remember watching him against Penn State, big plays in that game. He had 2 picks. He could have had a third. You watch him against Ohio State, and the guy that or Wisconsin continues to show up. He's a guy I'm excited about moving forward. And I did watch Tyler Johnson recently. He's going to the Shrine game. This is a guy that, look, he's had issues with drops over the course of his career. The games I watched, he did have a drop or two. Also made some outstanding catches. And as a route runner, he knows what he's doing, being able to create some separation. You go over to the other side for Auburn. Derek Brown, clearly the biggest name in this game. He is going to play. He announced he's going to play in this game. Will be his last game of his college career. Not going to play in the Senior Bowl, but will play here in the Outback Bowl with his team. Nick Coe, one of his teammates, declared for the draft and will not play. That's actually kind of interesting that he's kind of going away from where Derek Brown is going. But Marlon Davidson, the other senior defensive lineman, will play as well.
Massive trench players for Auburn there.
Davidson is a big, I mean, like you talk about like thick defensive ends, like a Brandon Graham, like a Cam Jordan, like that's kind of like Davidson is built that way.
Right.
He's really, really thick and kind of an edge setter. I'll tell you what though, the matchup that I think is kind of interesting is those Auburn tackles going up against that Minnesota front. They've got a couple players. We mentioned Carter Coughlin, but Prince Tega Wanogo, the left tackle, really athletic, pretty raw going, and then Jack Driscoll on the other side. He's a little bit undersized, might be more of a guard than a tackle, but I think when you look at Jack Driscoll, uses his hands well. He's got a good mindset in terms of his pass protection. He's just a little bit small, and I think that'll be the question. He's going to the Shrine game.
And I'll predict right now, this guy's put a lot of good stuff on tape, Derek Brown. He's going to the Senior Bowl. He's going to look good in shorts and a T-shirt at the Combine. He's going to destroy this offensive line. In this game,
I think you're right. Yeah.
He's going to put him into a solidified top 10 position in the NFL draft as far as the court of public opinion goes. This is going to be that Ndamukong Suh bowl game where that trench player stands out watching on TV. I bet he ruins the game for the Minnesota Gophers.
I just like, to me, and I feel this way about a lot of the defense tackles in this class, and because they're all good players, and I think they're all going to play. We'll edit that. 3, 2, 1. Because they're all good players, and I think they're all going to play in the league. But I think when you look at Derek Brown, Raekwon Davis, Javon Kinlaw, a little less about Gallimore, because I think Gallimore has that first step quickness, that explosive first step to be able to win quickly. I think when you look at elite defensive linemen in the NFL, defensive end, defensive tackle, doesn't matter. The elite guys, the best of the best, are the ones that can win quickly. I'm not sure that Derek Brown, who's a great player, Raekwon Davis, you know how I feel about him, great player, Javon Kinlaw, great player, they're kind of slow burn players in terms of their ability to win, getting after the quarterback. Dominant at the point of attack, can hold up in the run game really, really well. But I think when we're talking about upside and like what can they be, I'm not sure if are they Aaron Donald, are they Fletcher Cox, are they Geno Atkins, are they those guys? Those guys all win quick. With power, with technique, or with speed, they all can win quick.
And Derek Brown's a little rough around the edges. And sometimes I think they get these highly touted recruits and they're so excited to get them, they're not perfecting their game in the details. It's how I felt about Rashawn Gary at Michigan. It's like they got this number one player, let's go use him.
Right.
And by the time he's a junior and late into his career in college, you're like, he really hasn't developed his hand usage, the get off, the pass rush plan. And Derek Brown is massive. Huge player, naturally gifted player, strong player. When he gets to the NFL, somebody might put him in a track stance, work on that first step, work on his hand usage, work on his forward lean, and really refine all that kind of technique stuff in between the God-given abilities.
One quick matchup before we move to the next game. Looking at Auburn or Minnesota, they've got a corner, Chris Williamson, who's a transfer from Florida. He's going to the Shrine game. I watched him a few weeks back. This kid can play inside, outside, and I liked his instincts as well. Physical tools, a little bit questionable, but I think overall this is an instinctive player that I think will play in the league. Going up against this Auburn team that, look, it's Bo Nix, freshman quarterback, young group of receivers, but those guys can fly. You know, Seth Williams, a bigger kid. He's long. He can win at the catch point. He can move, and then Anthony Schwartz is a burner, so that'll be a good test there for Chris Williamson. All right, let's get to the granddaddy of them all. Let's go Rose Bowl, Oregon, Wisconsin. To me, you got the playoff games, you've got your game, the Citrus Bowl, and this one. Those are the 4 games that I'm most juiced about going into this week here.
That's a fun day of games.
That's a fun, no question.
A lot of prospects too. That's this is a prospect day. This is if you're interested in the NFL draft. Oregon, Wisconsin,
post up on the couch,
Michigan, Auburn. That's great. Yeah.
So Oregon, Wisconsin. I think 2 teams that, inherently want to run the football. Oregon, obviously they have Justin Herbert, but when you look at Mario Cristobal, his background, CJ Verdell, they want to be able to pound the rock. They want to win up front in the trenches. Going up against Wisconsin, that's their brand. Jonathan Taylor looks like he's going to play in this game. I think when you look at those guys, it's going to be a battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball.
Jonathan Taylor is a really interesting conversation. So much production, so much speed, but he's a heavy back. Like the NFL comp style conversation is all over the place with this kid.
How do you feel about him, overall? You haven't done your deep dive on him yet from this year, and the final report still
you can't watch his tape and think he can't be successful in the NFL.
He's a good player. He's a really good player.
He creates for himself. He has contact balance. He's got the home run speed. He's done enough in the pass game this year to show he could catch the balls in the flat and make people miss in the open field. He's got the track background.
When you look at the one question I think I would have was his vision I thought was solid, not great. I said the same thing about Saquon Barkley. I said the same thing about Leonard Fournette. I actually think that the conversation with him, especially coming off of last year, was similar to Fournette, where Fournette, different body types, obviously, but what can they do on third down? Leonard Fournette wasn't used that way at LSU coming into this year. And then I remember watching that opening game, Wisconsin USF. It might have been a Friday night game. Mm-hmm. He caught 4 passes in the first half. He caught a touchdown. And I'm all right, they're going to make more of an effort to get him involved. I'm excited to see what he looked like in pass protection. But Jonathan Taylor, if you're saying you need a workhorse back, you need a guy that could be your every down player, I don't see why Jonathan Taylor isn't that guy for an NFL team.
It's one of those things where it's you're almost going to look at his production and make that the detriment.
Right.
He has the tread on his tires. Played at Wisconsin, pro style, Big Ten, a lot of carries the past couple of years, all those yards. I actually hated Saquon's play style at Penn State.
Yep.
I don't like the run to daylight style, the improvisation, let me get to the edge in the open field. I want the dirty yards. I want you putting your pads
This guy
down,
does that.
Putting your nose down, falling forward, getting 5 when it's blocked for 2 or 3.
Yep.
That gets me excited. I don't like the out of structure stuff. And when Saquon went to the Giants, Pat Shurmur had to sit him down and say, you got to play like an NFL back. You got to get your nose up in there between the tackles and get the tough yards sometimes. And he kind of hit that transition last year at a point. I remember Saquon, and things kind of went clicked for him.
The one run he had this week was
but almost once a week, I look at Jonathan Taylor comps and look at his size, look at his speed. He's probably going to run in the high 4.4s.
Yeah.
So it's who is he? Is he Michael Turner? Is he T.J. Duckett? Is he a Lamont Jordan style of player?
Right.
I don't know who he is, and there might not be a comp for a player like that. And there are heavy backs that have run fast.
Right.
But there haven't been heavy backs with this type of production, with that type of speed, and in a pro-style system where it's so easy to project his ability. Now it's almost is the pro-style system hurting his projection? Would you rather a dynamic spacing player when you're looking at a Ravens offense and things like that? Would you rather a Big 12 running back, like a Justice Hill, that can play in more of an air raid space type of system?
I think it depends on how you play. If you're Dallas, then you have Ezekiel Elliott and you have all those gap scheme runs. You get them downhill. If you're Pittsburgh and what they've done in the past, I think a lot of those schemes, no, I want that guy that has the ability to create those dirty yards. I think you have to be able to be that guy, to be a workhorse, to be a foundation player for an NFL offense. I love the ability to play in space. You want that in today's game. You look at Miles Sanders and what he's been able to do. DeAndre Swift, I think, coming out of Georgia, the Philly kid, I think has that kind of potential. Taylor isn't quite that guy, but you need guys like that. And I think for a team that needs that force, that maybe they're 2 players away. This is a guy that can kind of change the face of what they are offensively. Yeah, I want that guy.
The whole conversation's interesting with his ability, his skill set, his size, his speed, with the deep running back class.
Yeah.
With the whole conversation about running back value.
Yep.
And for all those that think running backs don't matter, go look at Aaron Jones' 19 touchdowns this year. Look at what Miles Sanders doing.
Run game's coming back in the NFL. Look at all the best teams in the league
Christian
right now.
McCaffrey has 2,000 all-purpose yards.
Yep.
And, the running backs can get you yards when the plays are perfectly blocked.
Yep.
What about the special backs that get more than the plays blocked for, making players miss in the open field, catching the ball in the pass game? That's what you need in the NFL. And when you look around the league, those are the teams that are winning.
Yep.
players that can win in multiple phases and do more for your offense.
What's Jonathan Taylor like in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan?
Right.
Are you kidding? It's gonna be very, very interesting to see where he ends up, how he's used. Big matchup for Troy Dye, certainly in this game. Very, very. You talk about production. Maybe the most productive running back and linebacker matchup in recent bowl history. That's a ridiculous stat to say, but this guy's posted over 100 tackles every single year he's been on campus in Eugene, Oregon. Talking about Troy Dye, it'll be a good test for him. I'll give you another matchup I really like in this game. Quintez Cephas, the wide receiver for Wisconsin, he is their pass game. This guy catches. I haven't done a full study, but just watching Wisconsin, I watched him in the big title game. I watched a couple of games this season. Man, this guy, he looks like a fun player. I think
AJ Taylor got hurt.
Yeah,
and he's out for the bowl game.
Dude, I'm excited about Quintez Cephas. So looking at this kid based off TV, going up against that Oregon secondary that I know you like. Diamador Lenore, Thomas Graham. That'll be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, no question. On the other side, I really like Tyler Biadasz.
Yep.
Or excuse me, on the same side, but in the trenches, a stud center for Wisconsin going against the massive nose tackle Jordan Scott for Oregon.
Love that.
Should be a fun matchup there. Also, kind of an unsung player here, Isaiah Loudermilk. D tackle for Wisconsin.
Okay.
Huge player, 6'7", 300 pounds, plays inside, plays outside, plays 3-tech, plays nose tackle, will play off the edge. Played 8-man football in high school in Kansas.
This sounds like
an all-state basketball player, shot put, really fun player to watch, versatile player, athletic player. What player are you talking about?
The kid,
Dean Lowry?
Yeah, he sounds like Dean Lowry.
Yeah, he kind of looks like a Dean Lowry. Dean Lowry is pretty stumpy with the short arms.
Right.
Obviously, this kid's got a little bit more length to him, 6'7", 300 pounds. But basketball background, the 8-man football, fun player in the trenches there for Wisconsin.
I don't know much about that kid.
And against a very veteran Oregon offensive line, should be a fun battle.
Yeah, we've talked so much about that group. Obviously, another good one for Justin Herbert going up at Wisconsin. Look, that's a pro-style defense.
Yep.
And that's going to be a big test for Herbert in this game. Another chance for him to kind of go out strong because a good game against Utah, Pac-12 title. They upset Utah in that game. Good way to go out. If he can do well against this Wisconsin defense, big stage, Rose Bowl, pro-style scheme, aggressive scheme, 3-4, a lot of different looks. That'll bode well for him and his style.
I feel like a lot of these Wisconsin trench players are starting to really come on in the NFL right now and in a multitude of ways. Whether that's a Leon Jacobs, I think, getting some snaps at Jacksonville, Vince Beagle down in Miami, obviously TJ Watt up in Pittsburgh Steelers, and Joe Schobert, what he's done in his transition from an edge player to an off-the-ball linebacker in Cleveland. And I've been seeing all these articles now saying he's like a coveted free agent off-the-ball linebacker.
Right.
But Wisconsin, front seven, players that can play at the point of attack, play with their hands, handle their business in the trenches against the run and the pass game. Maybe not the most dynamic players, not the most explosive players, but guys that are strong, tough, and point of attack players, and usually those players can survive at the next level.
The guy that fits that bill this year for them seems to be, I haven't done him yet, is Zach Bond.
Yes.
Edge rusher. A lot of people feel like we'll make that move. Very similar to Joe Schobert when he was coming.
His background's very interesting, too. I think he's a
former quarterback.
Track background in high school, dynamic athlete, really somebody that Wisconsin doesn't typically get in that front seven.
Yeah, excited to dig into him as we get closer to the Senior Bowl. All right, final one. Sugar Bowl, Georgia versus Baylor. Not as many big matchups in this game, but I think it'll be a fun one. Obviously, look, Baylor had an outstanding season, very easily could have been in the college football playoff. Very, very close to doing that. But Georgia as well, very, very talented on both sides of the football. They'll be missing one of their best players. Andrew Thomas, this talented left tackle, did decide he's going to enter the draft, and he will not play in this game. Isaiah Wilson, the right tackle, also entered the draft, but he will be playing in the game, at least so we know. So the matchup to me, Isaiah Wilson going up against an All-American, the defensive lineman James Lynch, the first-team All-American for the Baylor Bears.
Yeah, I haven't really watched a lot of James Lynch, to be honest with you.
I haven't either.
His name's been on my chart. He might have been a first team last year as well.
You might be right.
Productive player, Clay Johnston, productive linebacker as well. A lot of interesting ties to Philadelphia here. Matt Rule, obviously, the Temple ties. There's a couple Baylor players that he's pulled from the area. The junior running back's a really interesting player. Jodrey Swift, highly touted running back at Georgia from the Philly area as well. I'd imagine there's some friendly interactions and people they're familiar with there.
That's a good point.
Yeah, interesting player. Jodrey Swift might be the best all-around running back in this draft.
He might be, yeah.
And he doesn't particularly look like the loose Miles Sanders dual threat back. This guy catches the ball really well, catches the ball down the field really well, and is really good after the catch. So a guy that I think has more upside in the pass game than his body type would suggest.
Jamichael Hasty, the running back on the other side, was a late add to the Senior Bowl. He was added on the roster reveal last week. I haven't done him yet. I was actually planning on doing him this morning, and time got away from me. You've watched him. What did you think of Hasty overall?
Yeah, and just really quick, they have a junior running back. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's from Jersey, just outside Philadelphia. He's the better prospect. He's going to be a stud next year. Hopefully he doesn't come out this year.
Okay.
But Jamichael Hasty, stumpy type of running back, 5'7", 210 pounds. Reminds me a lot of D'Angelo Henderson out of Coastal Carolina.
Eagles practice squad right now.
Exactly. Dynamic player, doesn't really have the home run speed, but has good lower body power, kind of a thick butt, thick upper legs there. But Denzel Mims.
He's a senior as well.
That's the stud of this game, I think. I really want to watch. Track background, 200-meter champion, basketball player.
Big kid.
Can play above the rim. Great story this past week of Baylor renting out a bowling alley and them letting a father-son come join them because the building was rented out. So just like hearing those types of things, just being a good human being, seems like a good kid, rooting for him.
Sure.
And everything I've heard, this kid can run, and I want to see him against these SEC corners.
Yeah, the SEC corners, they're young guys in that secondary on the corner spots, but two upperclassmen safeties. You got J.R. Reed, the safety, a finalist for the Thorpe Award, was an All-American as well. I watched Reed. I really liked him. I think he's got the ability to be a post player in the NFL, single high, free safety type. And then Richard LeCount, not as high on him, but this kid's an enforcer, can come downhill and lay a big hit on you as well from the back.
You know, some of these players, when you get to these highly touted programs, you almost get a little bit of backwards trajectory. Now, J.R. Reed, when he was a sophomore and played a national championship game,
top 10
sophomore,
pick.
He might have been freshman at the time, looked incredible.
Yep.
So sometimes these young players, you start on the mountain, and you have certain expectations, and he really hasn't lived up to those expectations.
Right.
A lot like the way Grant Delpit's season has gone. His production and play versus the expectations of these young players, you show out right away. People expect you to keep going up and up. And I think that's kind of hurt him a little bit. He's a really good player.
Yeah.
But I think has been overshadowed with his ability as a young player getting on the field, freshman, sophomore. But Richard LeCount, highly touted recruit, absolute missile on the field, killer, just wants to hit everything in front of him.
No question. That's definitely the play personality there. Well, Ben, looking forward to talking with you about these games. Certainly your game as well when you get back here after the holiday. But again, different schedule next week. We'll release a little bit later in the week after the New Year's Day bowl games. But excited to talk to you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Awesome stuff from Ben. And again, you can follow him on Twitter at @BenFennell_NFL. He does an outstanding job helping us throughout the year, especially during the football season, breaking down the Eagles, their opponents, helps us out on Eagles Game Plan over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade as well. This week on Eagles Game Plan, obviously a big week. We had Doug Peterson in studio breaking down the Eagles win over Dallas, and we're previewing what is essentially a playoff game, Eagles-Giants, on Sunday afternoon. So go check that out. Eagles Game Plan on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles YouTube page, wherever you can find the Philadelphia Eagles video content. You can find it over there. All right, let's get now into the next segment. It's time for Tom Luginbill and Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, so every week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, really for the last 2 seasons, Ben Fennell has sat next to us, and we've talked about all the cities they go to and the games, the players they see. This is the first time we're welcoming in another member of that crew, and that's Tom Luginbill, longtime ESPN college football analyst, is on that crew with Dave Pasch and with Greg McElroy. Tom, welcome to the show, man. Excited to have you on and talk a little bit about this draft class and some of the top players around the country.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It should be a lot of fun. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, happy holidays to everybody out there. And I want to start with a player and really kind of a topic that Ben and I have covered a couple of times over the course of the season. And I think this is Clemson linebacker, safety hybrid Isaiah Simmons, essentially a safety in that scheme for Brent Venables. And there have been so many players over the last few years that have kind of fit this mold. The Jabril Peppers, the Miles Jacks, guys that kind of play so many roles and wear so many different hats for their defenses in college, but trying to find out, okay, where are they best fit for the NFL? I want you to put your NFL GM hat on, Tom, and look at a guy like Isaiah Simmons. I know a player that you've been familiar with going back to high school. You've seen him up close a number of times. What are your thoughts on how he best projects to the NFL, and what are your thoughts on those kind of hybrid players in general as they make that transition to the pro ranks?
Well, I think he's what I would call a nickel linebacker, where he can play in a variety of roles. And the question that I've always asked myself is, if I'm on offense and I'm trying to get Isaiah Simmons off the field by what I do, whether it's a personnel grouping, whether it's a formation, whether it's down and distance, is it possible to do it? The answer is no. That's the issue. He is a 3-down, every down player that could play at all three levels of the defense. So call him a unicorn or a Pegasus or, a chess piece, whatever you want to call him. Today's game is about space and not having to leave the field for position groups and personnel groupings and shifts and rotations. This is a player that can stay on the field at all times. Now, what I think you mentioned Miles Jack, you mentioned Jabril Peppers. The difference between them and this guy is this guy's got about 4.5 inches on both of them. And what are coaches always looking for? They're looking for length. All right, they want length. They want guys that can cover ground. They want fluidity. And in today's NFL game, whether it's the slot, whether it's the athletic movement, a jumbo wide receiver H-back guy, he can match up and hold up versus probably anybody in the league. So I think he's the rarest of defensive players right now, particularly for what today's game has become. And there's not a lot of guys that come to mind that you say, wow, if this guy had to play in a box, he can play in a box. If he had to leverage the football and set the edge, if he had to do it from distance in a run fit style, he can do that. The only thing that I've found with him is, as good as he is in coverage, when he's involved in zone concepts, he will get to his landmark so quick that oftentimes he'll get himself set and he'll lose sight of where the ball is or the awareness of his peripheral vision, and maybe it alters which way he should pivot. And that's something that obviously is coachable. It's an awareness thing. But I almost feel like sometimes I'm like, you know what? If he didn't get there so fast, he'd probably see what was around him developing better instead of getting there, sitting and waiting and then looking for it. So you're nitpicking, obviously, and you're trying to find, where's an area of weakness, because there are no perfect players. But man, this guy's pretty dang good.
It's going to be a lot of fun to watch him on the field this week against Ohio State. It's going to be a really, really fun matchup on both sides of the ball in that game. Real quickly, I don't want to hit you too off the cuff with this, but this was a guy they kind of plucked him out of nowhere. He's from the middle of Kansas, if I remember right. How did they find this guy? And was he was he a big name recruit coming out that everybody was kind of fighting for out of that state?
So he was a lower-end 4-star for us. And one of the reasons why we gave him a 4-star is we saw a high ceiling, probably similar to what Clemson saw. This was a kid that was 6'3", 6'4", probably 195 pounds. So they're looking at him, they're saying, okay, 2 years, he's 210, he's 215, he's 220. Now all of a sudden he fills out, he's a different guy. What you could not ignore on tape was his ability to run, his explosiveness, his fluidity, all of those things were evident. But to your point, you're in Kansas, not a lot of recruiting traffic. Now all of a sudden you just got to maybe kind of hope you find the right spot.
Yeah, well, we've seen a couple of players come out of that state over the last few years. There's not many, but what we've seen, I think Josh Jacobs was out of Kansas last year. Obviously, Bryce Brown and Arthur Brown were out of Kansas a few years back, but not too often that we get some big players from that state. But let's move on. I know a game that you're doing, we talked about it earlier with Ben, the Citrus Bowl. Alabama going up against Michigan, two of college football's blue blood programs, a game that I'm very much looking forward to next week. I want to ask you, every time we have a guest on, I want to ask about that Alabama trio of wide receivers. I'm going to leave Jalen Waddle out of it because he's obviously not eligible for this draft. But when you look at Jerry Judy and Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith, all three guys are underclassmen, have not officially declared yet. But when you look at those three, who kind of separates themselves? Who do you kind of say is that this guy is the top of the rung when you look at their projection to the NFL?
I would probably say Jerry Judy, because I think he is an innately polished, natural route runner. And I really think in the NFL's game today, you've got to be able to separate. I think separation, leveraging opponents, attacking a defender's alignment, eating up cushion, all of these different little nuances, the things that made a Steve Largent great. Like if you put a Steve Largent into Antonio Brown's talent, what would you have had? So I think that's what makes Jerry Judy unique, because it's easy for him. Those are things that are innate. I think Henry is the fastest. I think Devonta Smith is the most fluid of the three in terms of natural wiggle. I mean, he's like a human rubber band. I worry a little bit about him in terms of overall durability. He's built like a taller Deshaun Jackson, maybe a little bit more fluid in his overall movement. So it's interesting because when you watch him in person, you can tell he can run, right? But I don't think you realize truly how fast he is until people are on his heels, because he's so weavy and wiggly that it's hard to kind of gauge what he's doing. Whereas Henry Ruggs, boom, he's 25 miles an hour down the sideline. But if you took and you combined all of their skill sets, I think it's got to be Jerry Jeudy, because he does the thing that Amari Cooper always did, and that he knows how to run routes and get open.
Yeah, he has been. You can see that coming out of high school. What he was able to do at the top of his stem was just like eye popping.
Right.
Watching him in college or in high school rather, really really special player. Let's go now. Whenever I talk with college football analysts and guys that kind of major in that sport, I always love hearing about some of the players. They say, man, like, why are people surrounding the NFL draft not talking about this guy? Is there a name or two that you've just been so surprised that you're not hearing more about based off what you've seen from them in person?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a few. One of them is going to be an underclassman that I think is going to come back, but people got to start paying attention. And Ben Fennell will probably echo this. But Brandon Ayuk, the wide receiver from Arizona State, he is a flat-out playmaker. And at 6'1", 205, he's built an awful lot like Dez Bryant was built coming out of Oklahoma State. Has a physicality to him, but also has that explosiveness to separate, take the top off the defense, and then he can make things happen with the ball in his hands. And obviously we know, wide receivers are standing on every street corner, so it's hard for them all to get the same level of attention. But I think he could be a steal for somebody. I think with it being such a poor tight end class, Hunter Bryant's decision to declare for the NFL draft at the University of Washington was a very wise one financially, because he kind of fits that mold of what we talked about with who do you want to line up Isaiah Simmons against, and it's that athletic wide receiver that can detach and get out in the slot. You can move him around. Hunter Bryant is basically a wide receiver in a bigger body. So I think that's one that probably needs to garner a little more attention. And then the underclassman is the quarterback, Jamie Newman, out of Wake Forest.
Yep.
All he's done is won. All he's done is make every throw on the field. He's a dynamic athlete. He's 6'4", 230. He happens to play in the same conference with Trevor Lawrence. He's got a lot of the same traits that Justin Fields has, and we see the attention that Justin Fields is getting. Obviously because of the branding of an Ohio State and where they are as a program. But Jamie Newman might be one of those guys that climbs up people's boards as people start paying more attention to him. And, of course, he'll come back and have his redshirt senior year, which I think is important.
Yeah, Ben was singing his praises when he came back from that game, and he mentioned that they've got a young kid coming up as well who looks like he's got all the tools as well. I'm glad you brought up Ayuk, because he's a guy, Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, he had brought him up to us early in the season, and you watch him on film, and this kid, he's got another gear with the ball in his hands. He is really impressive in person.
He is. I just think that when you have guys that can make plays at all three levels, and when I say that, you're short, you're intermediate, and deep. All right, well, what do you want to do with the short? You want to catch the slant, you want to catch the hitch, and you want to turn that 5-yard catch into a 70-yard gain. He can do that. He can stem people on the speed cutouts and the bang eights and all those at the intermediate level, and then vertically he can run right past you. And so I think he's got great hands, terrific ball skills, and he's also been, even though he's not a 6'4" guy, he's been a surprisingly productive contested matchup guy. 50-50 ball, he wins.
Yeah, I want to bring up another guy to me that kind of fits that category. And I feel like I'm a little bit higher than most people on the defensive end, outside linebacker from Tennessee, Darrell Taylor, a senior this year, a guy I know that you've seen him in person, and I know he's obviously been on the national radar for a couple of years now. How do you view Taylor and overall just kind of where he's at in terms of his development moving to the NFL?
So the development side moving to the NFL is going to have to come in the run game. And he's one of those guys when you turn on the tape, and I think there's a vast difference between his pass rush skill set, his third down value, his ability to get off the football, use his hands, be an explosive guy that can shave the edge. And then you watch him on key rundowns, and it can be very difficult for him to leverage the ball, very difficult for him to hold up at the point of attack. I think at times his eyes go to the ground and he loses sight of where the football is. Now, he's 255 pounds.
Yep.
I think he still has the frame to get into the 265, 270 round max. But I think that his ability to develop as an every down player, particularly on early downs where he can't be taken advantage of, I feel like he's one of those guys that when people block his inside shoulder, he is very quick to turn his butt to the sideline and creates an alley. It's just been difficult for him for some reason, whether it's leverage, pad level. I don't think he's got a strong upper body right now, particularly with his hands. But when you watch him on the passing downs, he jumps off the tape. And I think that's what, listen, those guys aren't growing on trees.
Right.
I can throw a rock out of my office right now and hit a receiver, but I can't hit those guys coming off the edge. So the good news is you got physical growth development upside to continue to get bigger and stronger. And there's coachable traits that don't have anything to do with physical deficiencies. So I think that's important when you look at the developmental side versus the run game and anchoring at the point of attack.
Yeah, without question, you could see the difference with him coming off the football in early downs versus passing downs. You can look at his eyes, and it looks like on the early downs, he's reading the man across from him, and he's looking at that, and he's just late reacting to that movement from the tackler or the tight end. Third down, passing down, third and long, he's reading the ball, and this kid is flying upfield, eating so much ground up. So I think the scheme that he ends up in the NFL will be very, very interesting, the kind of situation that he ends up in. Lastly, I know that you're also going to be working the Peach Bowl this weekend, a big game, obviously college football playoff. You'll be working in studio with Lou Riddick, former Eagles executive, and doing the ESPN film room, which is always so much fun. I love watching it. Anyone who loves the X's and O's side of it, it's a great way to kind of ingest the game as it's happening. Give us a little bit of a matchup. What's a taste of a player-on-player matchup, or just a theme that you're excited about going into that game?
So I think one of the things that you've got to understand with both of these teams in this matchup is how in the world are you supposed to tackle in space? How do you practice it? How do you prevent the slant from turning into an 80-yard touchdown? So for me, you've got Derek Stingley, the true freshman, 24. All right. I think we're going to have a healthy Grant Delpit for the first time in several weeks. You got Christian Fulton on the other side. How do you prevent CeeDee Lamb from extending plays after the catch? Because there are 5'9" guys to 5'11" guys that are really good with the ball in their hands. There are very few 6'3" guys that move like they're 5'11", and CeeDee Lamb does. So when you watch Oklahoma and we've seen the vertical throws, okay, he'll make the contested catch. But watch number 2 from Oklahoma after the catch. He's really difficult to deal with. If LSU can limit those plays to number 2, then they're going to force Jalen Hurts to have to go somewhere else. And I think that takes him out of his comfort level. Yeah. So the matchup of how you limit, not so much the touches, but the yards that come after the touches for CeeDee Lamb is going to be a real telltale sign for that Oklahoma offense.
Yeah, I think this is a game. Obviously, Oklahoma wants to make this a shootout. I think Dave Aranda, in that scheme, it's going to be on them in terms of what this is going to be defensively for LSU. Sure. Tackling on the back end or something. I remember going back to the summer watching Fulton and Delpit, also the other kid, Kerry Vincent as well. Tackling has not been a strength for them over the last couple of years. I agree with you wholeheartedly. They've got to be able to get Lamb and even McCoy as well, Kennedy McCoy. They got to be able to get him, Jalen Hurts, all to the ground. But Tom, really appreciate it. Looking forward to watching this weekend and next week as well over on ESPN. Thanks again for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.
Well, that was awesome stuff from Tom Luginbill, a guy that I'm excited to potentially talk with again down the line. Maybe we'll get him over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, at some point this spring. And again, we're starting to transition now, hopefully not for a few more weeks, a couple more months, hopefully, from the in-season format of the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, where Greg Cosell is in every single week. We're talking X's and O's, talking about the Eagles and their last game and previewing the upcoming game. But once we get into the offseason, we start talking about people or talking with people all over the country, all about college football, the NFL draft, player evaluation, X's and O's. We'll talk with coaches, college, NFL. We talk with players. It's a lot of fun. We get different guests all across the realm of football every single week. So even if you're not an Eagles fan and you're just a fan of X's and O's and learning more about the game, team building, X's and O's, that standpoint, make sure you go check out the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, let's now get into our next segment. It's time for Draft Buzz and Tony Pauline.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Happy to welcome back to the show this week for Draft Buzz on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, our friend Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network. Tony, Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you and your family.
Thanks. Happy holidays to you and all the listeners. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Festivus, of course.
Of course. We'll do the airing of grievances at a later date. But let's get here into Draft Buzz and talk about some more underclassmen news potentially. What do you got for us here on that front?
Yeah, two cornerbacks, two guys that are potential third-round picks, I think more last-day picks. Trajan Bandy, the cornerback from Miami. Javelin Guidry, the cornerback from Utah. And Guidry, basically, if he enters the draft, which I'm hearing he's very likely to do, what that does is it's going to wipe out the entire Utah Utes secondary with the seniors that are graduating, with Jalen Johnson on his way to the draft. Guidry's a super fast guy. He's got solid ball skills. Trajan Bandy's got excellent ball skills. Coming into the year, he was my highest-rated Miami Hurricane, though that doesn't hold the same sort of weight as it did in the past. He was a third-round pick. Both of these guys are good defensive backs. The problem is they both go about 5'9", 5'9.5". And while they can play at the next level, there's really not a big market for cornerbacks who were that short, if we can say that short in the NFL draft. So I think you're looking more like third-day guys. I think Bandy may have a chance to slide into the third round, but I still think they're going to be good nickel or dime backs at the next level.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't done work on either guy yet. Obviously, that Utah secondary just loaded with talent at all three levels, but certainly in that secondary, a lot of players to break in with that team. All right, let's get now into the college football playoff. We talked earlier a couple of weeks ago with Ben Fennell previewing the college football playoff, so I thought, you know what? Games are here. Let's do this with Tony this week. We talked about the New Year's Day games earlier with Ben. I want to talk about these big matchups here with Oklahoma versus LSU, Clemson, Ohio State. Let's start with the Peach Bowl, Oklahoma, LSU. What are some matchups that you're excited to watch here on Saturday?
Well, the obvious matchup is going to be the Oklahoma offense, specifically Jalen Hurts and C.D. Lamb, against that LSU defense, specifically that secondary with Christian Fulton, Grant Delpit, both guys are first-round picks. Kerry Vincent Jr., who plays nickel back there. I think that's a terrific matchup. Everybody thinks that C.D. Lamb or people are projecting C.D. Lamb as a top 15, potential top 12 pick. I'm not as high on him as the top 12 pick. I think he's a good, really good college receiver. We're going to see how he does against that LSU secondary, which is, as we said a number of times, and I hate to be redundant, that's an NFL secondary. I mean, Christian Fulton has really played well the last 2 months of the season. Grant Delpit, he is an explosive safety. Kerry Vincent Jr. is an outstanding player. And then there's, of course, Derek Stingley, who's a true freshman who could be the best of the bunch, but isn't even draft eligible. So that is the obvious matchup that, you got to watch. And Jalen Hurts is going to be the toughest test of the season. And I've thrown praise on Jalen Hurts all season long because he deserves it, because I really think he's developed into a real good passer. Well, now we're going to see how he does against some NFL-type competition.
No question. We talked earlier with Tom about that matchup, C.D. Lamb against the secondary. I think when you look at that LSU secondary, really athletic group of guys that can shadow and man coverage and play anything you want on the back end. But going back to it, I think they got to be able to tackle. They've got to be able to get these guys to the ground, and that's not just C.D. Lamb. That's also Kennedy McCoy, who has been a really dynamic player for them at the running back spot, and then also Jalen Hurts, who was the second leading rusher in the Big 12 this year behind only Chuba Hubbard. When you look at Jalen Hurts and what he can do on the ground, that's going to be an X factor in this game. This is a team, LSU, that has struggled at times to stop the run at a very high level throughout the course of the season. Lincoln Riley's going to have some different things devised up from a game plan standpoint to try and attack those weaknesses. So when you look at that front three, Rashard Lawrence, Fehoko up front for LSU, you look at the second level with Divinity and Chason, what those guys are going to be able to do to stop the run, that's going to be imperative against this team. Obviously, an option-based rushing attack with Lincoln Riley, Jalen Hurts, McCoy, and the rest of that group. They're missing some players there on that side of the ball as well due to suspension. But to me, I agree with you. That's going to be very, very huge. Tackling for LSU is going to be paramount in this game.
And the decision-making of Jalen Hurts, because it's one thing to sit back there and pick apart Big 12 defenses, which is, they're not the best defenses in college football. Forget about the world. And he did a great job of it. But it's a different thing against LSU. And, people can nitpick about the tackling. Okay, I can agree with that to an extent. But you can't nitpick about the athleticism or the pure ball skills or the way they pass defense. So while, Hurts, they got to cut down on him making plays with his legs. Hurts has got to make sure that he makes good decisions in the pocket, which he's done all year long. Yep. And he makes good decisions throwing the ball, which he's done all year long. Because this is not West Virginia. This is not Oklahoma State. This is not Iowa State he's going up against. This is LSU, and these guys are going to be playing. These guys are going to be early draft picks. They're going to be starters at the next level.
Yeah, and then going over to the other side, I really don't envision a scenario where Oklahoma is able to stop LSU. I think really the only shot they've got is if that defensive front is able to get to Joe Burrow. No one has really been able to do that at a really successful rate this year. Auburn did it a little bit in the first half. Alabama more in the second half of that game. But after that, no team has really been able to get to him. He's been able to get the ball out very quickly. That offensive line has held up well. They're going to be missing their number one sack artist in Ronnie Perkins. He is suspended for this game, an underclassman pass rusher. So it's going to be on Neville Gallimore. I guess Kenneth Murray, the linebacker, making plays from sideline to sideline as well. But no, this is going to be tough sledding for this Oklahoma defense. Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator, it's going to be a tough matchup for them. But you talk about these playmakers, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Is there one in particular that you're most excited to watch in this game?
Well, as far as the game's concerned, it would be Jamar Chase, obviously. Justin Jefferson, I think from an NFL draft point of view, he's shown a lot of improvement in his game, a lot of improvement as a receiver. Obviously, Joe Burrow, you can't say enough about him. And really, it's the exact opposite, where the LSU secondaries has got a good chance of shutting down CD Lamb. I agree with you. I see no way that the Oklahoma Sooner secondary is going to be able to stay with these guys because, if they're covering Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson's just going to make plays. They got Stephen Sullivan back there, Derek Dillon. They got an array of guys back there. Yeah. And I think it's just going to be tough sledding for the Oklahoma defense as a whole. And I think that Joe Burrow is just going to torch that secondary.
Yeah, one thing of note to keep an eye on for the championship is that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the talented running back, the junior for LSU, limited with an injury going into this game. So I don't know if LSU necessarily needs him for this matchup, but if he does go, that would have been an interesting one-on-one there. Him and Kenneth Murray, especially out in space. Helaire has caught over 50 passes for LSU this year, so certainly has been a factor in the passing game. But I think they'll be able to chug along just fine if he's not in the lineup for this game or if he's only at 50, 60, 70% in this matchup. All right, let's get to the night game now. The 8 p.m. Fiesta Bowl. This is the big one. Ohio State, Clemson. Tony, I'm going to be honest, man. I was thinking about this game a lot driving in today, just kind of thinking about it, thinking about the podcast. I can talk myself into picking either team in this matchup. I think right now, as I sit here, I'm leaning Clemson with Trevor Lawrence and really going back to Diable Sweeney and that Tony Elliott and that offensive coaching staff. And I would go with Brent Venables as well on the defensive side. That coaching staff and the quarterback for Clemson, we've seen them do it against high-level competition in the past in big moments. I know they haven't shown it this year yet because of their schedule, but that's tough for me to pick against Clemson, man. Even though I think Ohio State might be a more well-rounded roster, I think when you look at coaching staff and quarterback, which are the two most important things in college football, I think Clemson, right now, I think they've got the edge.
I disagree, and I'll tell you why. I think it's a good matchup between Clemson's offense and Ohio State's defense.
Yes.
But when I look at Ohio State's offense, specifically their offensive line, I think they're just going to maul Clemson. I think they're going to push them up and down the field. Clemson's got a lot of talented players in that defensive back seven. Isaiah Simmons, A.J. Terrell, Kavon Wallace, Tanner Muse, a good player. But I just think that Ohio State offensive line, which is very underrated, Thayer Munford, Brandon Bowen, Jonah Jackson, the Rutgers transfer who's played terrific all year.
Wyatt Davis.
Exactly. I just think that they are going to maul that Clemson defensive line who, 3 first-round picks last year.
Yep.
And all 3 of them went in the top 18. You just don't – Clemson's played well, and they deserve a lot of credit. I just don't see that defensive line, that defensive front of Clemson being able to stand up against the Ohio State offensive line. And then you throw in what Justin Fields is able to do, throwing the ball and running the ball. J.K. Dobbins, the running back, who I think is one of the most underrated, most versatile backs in the nation. Absolutely love his game. They don't have the playmakers at receiver that Clemson does, but still, K.J. Hill, Benjamin Victor, Austin Mack, those guys can play. Those guys can play at a high level. They're not the game breakers of the Clemson receivers, and that's going to be a matchup to watch against that Ohio State secondary, but they're still solid players. I just think for me, this game comes down to Ohio State's offensive line, I believe, just controlling Clemson's defensive line, which is why I think Ohio State wins.
Yeah, I started thinking going back into that title game last year and thinking I really didn't think that Clemson was going to really have too many answers for Tua and for that offense. And, they were just hitting on all cylinders. Mike Locksley was calling hell of a game leading up to it. And, I just kind of felt like, all right, there's no way they're going to be able to really put the brakes on this Alabama offense. And then Brent Venables comes out. They've got all that speed at the second level and the third level. They found ways to be able to lock those guys down again. Agree with you wholeheartedly. That front seven, at the linebacker level, they're very light. They're a little bit inexperienced there. Defensive line, there's a young group. Xavier Thomas is a true sophomore, former #1 recruit, 5-star kid who hasn't quite had the production people expected. Tyler Davis is a nose tackle that has been really productive for them as a true freshman, second team all-conference this year. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to if Ohio State can run the ball, I agree with you. If they can get Dobbins going, that kind of sets the tone for this game. Because when I look at Justin Fields, this guy holds the ball. Like he'll hold the ball back there and wait for those guys to get open. If the pass rush can get home, if Brent Venables can do some things on the back end to confuse Fields, that can play into their hands. It's going to be very, very interesting on that side of the ball. What Ohio State's game plan is, if they're able to establish the run and kind of control the ball, I think that would play well in their favor. Because on the other side, I think we're talking, this is blue chip versus blue chip. The challenges with Ohio State's defense going up against Clemson's offense, and you talk about on the outside alone. Jeffrey Okudah at left corner, Damon Arnett at right corner, Sean Wade in the slot going up against Justin Ross and T. Higgins and Amani Rogers. This is an awesome individual matchup in this game.
And don't forget Jordan Fuller, the safety, who really hasn't played all that well. It was great as a sophomore. I think his game is leveled off, but he's a solid player between the ears, not a great athlete. But yeah, and you're talking from what I'm hearing, Okudah's going to enter the draft. He's going to be a top 12 pick. I'm hearing Sean Wade's going to enter the draft. He's more of a second-day pick. Arnett, we're going to see him at the Senior Bowl.
Could be a second-day pick as well.
Jordan Fuller, we're going to see at the Shrine game. So, yep. From what I'm also hearing, T. Higgins and Amari Rogers are likely on their way to the next level once the playoffs are over. Still got Justin Ross coming back. It's probably more dynamic than the matchup that we're going to see between CeeDee Lamb and the LSU secondary, only because Clemson has more weapons. Clemson has more game-impacting weapons that can game-breaking weapons that will be on the field against the Ohio State secondary.
Yeah, Ohio State's defense, very, very talented. They've got great talent at all three levels. They haven't seen an offense like this. And remember, Jeff Hafley, one of the co-defensive coordinators, he left to be the head coach at Boston College. I know he's going to coach in this game. I just know that obviously he's got a lot going on in his mind. And then I go back to the other side. That trio of coaches, both coordinators for Clemson and obviously Dabo, they're rock solid. They're in here. They're motivated. This is a group that's felt like they've been disrespected all year. I've really gone back and forth in this game. I just find it hard to pick against that team. But by the way, we've had this whole conversation. We haven't talked about the best player in college football yet, right. Chase Young, and the impact that he can have on this game. And I think from a game plan standpoint, it's going to be very interesting to see what Dabo kind of draws up. There are different ways, obviously, to negate a talented pass rusher like a Chase Young. Then you've got the matchup with him and Tremaine Ankrum, the senior that I like. Obviously, Young, much more physically gifted. That's going to be a one-on-one matchup. I can't wait to study on film from Ankrum's standpoint, especially.
Well, I think you got to go a little bit deeper than that. You got to look at that entire Clemson offensive line.
Yeah.
That's got 4 next-level players, and John Simpson, the guard, Sean Pollard, who played center. He's played a bunch of positions, having a real good year. Gage Cervanek, Ankrum, who you mentioned. And right, everyone wants to talk about Chase Young, understandably so. They still have Davin Hamilton, who's a good player. Robert Landers, the defensive tackle, comes off the bench. You got those linebackers, Malik Harrison, who I know you like a lot, Turf Borland, Pete Werner. So again, I mean, Clemson's really going to be challenged. Everyone's going to focus on Chase Young, understandably. But that Ohio State defensive front seven really is deep and is really talented, and I think is really going to give Dexter Lawrence a run for his money, as well as that Clemson offensive line. And remember, Clemson's got a darn good running back in Travis Etienne. I mean, he's a guy, if there's a bit of space, if he gets a little bit of room, he's gone. He can beat defenders into the open field and take it the distance. So I think the way I am confident about the Ohio State offensive line, basically handling the Clemson defensive line, I'm not as confident on the Clemson offensive line being able to do a similar sort of situation against the Ohio State defensive front seven.
Right. That's the thing. Is you look at it, it's like, all right, trenches both sides. I lean Ohio State. This is one of my favorite games that I've kind of evaluated and broken down, college or NFL, in the last handful of years. This is going to be a really, really fun matchup. You look at Ohio State. You mentioned trying to stop Travis Etienne. They've done a really good job stopping the run most of the season. The Big Ten title game game. They had some issues, especially in that first half with Jonathan Taylor. We'll see if Clemson is able to find some success on the ground, but we know ETN is a home run hitter. He can take it the distance anytime he touches the football. So, Tony, I don't know, man. It's going to be a really good game.
The thing is this, you kind of mentioned what the difference could be without mentioning it, and that's Diable Sweeney against Ryan Day.
Yeah.
I mean, Diable Sweeney's been in this situation for what? This is his 4th year in a row?
Yeah.
Ryan Day's a first-year coach, and he's done a great job. But as you said, they have not played the type of competition that they're going to be playing against Clemson. So that could be the difference there. A seasoned head coach who's been through the ups and downs, getting through the national championship, playing for a national championship, winning and losing a national championship against a first-year coach that's had a lot of great success, but has never been in this spot before. And, sometimes people don't understand it. People don't really think about it. We talk about the players, but that could be the difference in the game.
All right, so I think we both feel LSU is going to win this game for the Peach Bowl. For the Fiesta Bowl, what do you think? It sounds like you're leaning Ohio State. I'll lean Clemson.
I think Ohio State by 10, yeah.
All right, it's going to be a good one. I kind of like LSU going up against Ohio State as well from a storyline standpoint. Joe Burrow playing against his former team. That offense versus that defense will be a lot of fun to watch. I feel like Clemson's going to pull this one out. We'll see. We'll talk about it next week here, Tony, here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to everybody.
All right, so we mentioned there on the back end of that conversation with Tony, again, you can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline, about the job that Clemson offensive lineman Tremaine Ankrum is going to have this week, trying to block Chase Young, one of the best players in college football, a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. Let's get to that now in our scouting report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
All right, so Tremaine Ankrum is a guy that I actually watched over the summer, and then we knew about that senior-laden offensive line. We talked about it earlier with Tony. And Ankrum was a player that really stood out to me. Everyone really likes the left guard, John Simpson. He's a good player. He's powerful. He's stout. He's got the ability to win as a mauler in the trenches. But Ankrum is the guy that really stood out to me, and it's not because he wowed me with his physical tools or, wow, look how athletic, look how powerful. It was more just the way he played the position. We'll kind of get into my notes here in a second. 2.5-year starter at right tackle for Diable Sweeney in that shotgun spread offense. He's pretty short for a tackle. A lot of people feel he will have to move into guard. He's got a little bit of a squatty frame, and at the end of the day, maybe he is better inside, but I think he's shown that he could play tackle, and here's why. I think he's a pretty smooth athlete. He's not going to be described as explosive or twitchy, but he's fluid, he's loose, he's comfortable, he's very easy as a mover, really impressive in pass protection. He gets out of his stance well, great kick step, gets good width, gets good depth, and he gets to his set point really, really efficiently. I thought he was very calm and collected in his pass set. He never seems to panic, constantly keeps himself in position between the defender and the quarterback. Obviously, that's going to be stressed. I'm excited to see him because I wanted to see him against an explosive, twitchy, really dynamic pass rusher. We're going to see him here in this game against Chase Young, able to replace his hands really quickly. He does a good job of disrupting the timing of the pass rusher. Again, that will be tested against Chase Young. Even when he's beaten, I thought he showed the ability to recover well, whether that meant having to make sure he gets to the corner or just trying to reset and get a quick anchor. He showed the ability to do both. So a guy that, pass protection wise, again, not the most explosive athlete. And one of my negatives on him, he's not the most powerful guy in the run game. He doesn't just move people off the ball with ease, but this guy just has a really good sense of how to play. And a lot of playing on the offensive line is playing with confidence and the ability to win, to recover. I thought that he showed that ability. In the run game, he plays with good pad level. He can sink his hips into contact. He can run his feet on contact. Position blocker, does a good job of getting his hips around and into position to create a seal. He can reach a 3 technique from the backside, and he can swing his hips around to complete the block. And he does a nice job in their zone run schemes. From a negative standpoint, again, just doesn't have a lot of pop on contact. He's not a powerful people mover. He needs to do a better job of just trying to generate that movement at the point of attack. But overall, what I wrote about Tremaine Ankrum, not a dominant player, but a very competent pass protector who I think is going to has the ability to protect the corner in the NFL. His body type speaks more to being a guard, and his lack of length may ultimately force him inside. But the more I watch, the more I think he could stick a tackle. I think you've seen guys all across the NFL over the last last few years who maybe don't always look the part, but will turn into longtime starters on the left side. He's a guy like Charles Leno, who was a day 3 pick for the Chicago Bears and has turned into their left tackle for really since his rookie season. I kind of see him very similarly to Charles Leno. I think he's a really good pass protector and the ability to hold up. Again, that's going to be tested this week against Chase Young, a guy that is one of the best players in college football. So one of the fun, interesting one-on-one matchups certainly here this weekend with this weekend's bowl games. All right, let's now wrap this show up. Let's get into our draft mailbag, answer some questions from you at home.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
All right, so I said at the top of the show, best way to support the podcast, go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you listen, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. I wanted to answer one of those questions on our Apple Podcast page. David left a question saying, which bowl game outside of the obvious ones are you most excited for? And to me, I look at the Alamo Bowl. We talked about the Citrus Bowl earlier with Alabama versus Michigan. I talked about the Rose Bowl with Oregon versus Wisconsin. Certainly some matchups I'm excited about. When you go outside of those big ones, though, the Alamo Bowl, you've got Utah versus Texas. And I look at Texas' offense. Sam Ehlinger, obviously, look, they haven't had as much success this year as they would have liked. But when you look at him, they had a great bowl game last year, big win against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl that a lot of people were excited about coming into this season. And he's got a cast there. When you look at Devon Duvernay, the wide receiver, undersized, but can create big plays after the catch, can work vertically down the field, has been great in the slot. Devon Duvernay is a guy that's really impressed me on film. Colin Johnson, hopefully healthy. Not positive that he's going to play in this game, but he's a huge target on the outside as well. They've got another receiver, Eagles, who's a big kid who can run down the field. So looking at that Texas passing game, even though Ehlinger's a little bit limited as a passer, looking at that passing game going up against this Utah defense, that secondary. Tony brought up Jodrey earlier as a potential guy to enter this draft. Julian Blackmon, free safety. Looks like he's a little banged up, may not play, but you've got Jackson on the other side, the other corner, or Jalen Johnson, rather, who's entering the draft. A lot of people are really high on that kid. Francis Bernard is a factor in the middle of the field in coverage as well, the linebacker. So, I look at this Utah secondary against this Texas passing game, and overall, just the both teams in general. I like Utah in this game, but should be a really fun matchup. That's the one I'm most excited about outside of the typical bowl games that people are going to be paying the most attention to. All right, that'll do it. Really fun show. Again, happy holidays to everybody out there. No matter what you celebrate, I hope you have a great time with family and friends. And we will see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.